Hello and welcome to episode 3 of creating our VFX selection and destination markers. We're commencing with the C++ in this episode, starting with the Niagara component. So we'll come into our project source folder. We'll create a new class. I'm going to create a Niagara. And we'll call this prefix whatever you like. I'm just going to prefix with RTS and I'm just going to call it marker component. And I'm going to put that in a components folder. Now it's going to have a sad with because we don't have Niagara installed, so we need to come to our build. And why does this not have private dependencies? That's super weird. You can have issues if it doesn't link up with the build. Whenever I get weird stuff like this, I always just rebuild the files. So I'm going to do that. So to do that, you just come to delete the SLH immediate binaries. And Windows 11, if you don't have the option here, it's under show more options. Generate the Visual Studio project files. Good start, anyway. This should kick over soon, so we can get rid of this. This will sort itself out in a minute. Once the build file updates, there it goes. We're going to add our initializer here. And create our constructor. And I think we will create the settings class too, just while we're creating classes. I'm going to go from the root directory here again, or the project directory. And we're going to create a RTS marker, developer settings. And if you just search in here, CVARs should come up with developer settings backed by CVARs. And I'm going to put this under data. And we're going to just do the constructor. Don't need the object initializer here, just don't forget to define it though. And we're going to need some uClass settings for this one, so we want it to save to config. You can do a custom config file here. I'm just going to do game, so that will come into the default game. That's where it'll be saved. Oh, I think this defines the default config. I'm not sure. Anyway, and then this meta display name is what will show up in the project settings as. I'm going to just call it RTS marker settings. All right, so we'll come back to this as well. The last one we're going to create, well, probably not the last one, but the next one, is just going to create an interface. So the RTS marker interface. Put that in a folder called interfaces. Did I put? Yeah, I did. Yeah. And then in our interface, we'll use this interface to talk to whatever entity is going to have these markers on it. So it'll basically be an easy way to get data or information to this component. So actually, we might add some functions here. So first one will be the create markers. And then we're going to fetch our Niagara systems from some data later. So I've noticed with Niagara, don't do forward declarations, do an include, because it seems to crack it. If you try and do a forward for that class. Not sure why, but that's what happens. get Niagara system. And now we're going to have, by default, I'm just going to do 3 markers. So I'm going to do selection, destination, preview. They could all use the same Niagara system, and that's how I'll be setting it up. But I'm going to set up this component and the interface and everything in case you want to use a separate entire effect for each one. So this is why we'll have a bit of duplication here. So we'll have 2 more, and this one will be destination, will be the preview. And then we're going to have the same again. So we'll have 3 separate functions to get the material. So if we want to change the material, and it's going to be material instance. Then we have some other interfacing ones. So the float, marker size. So this will be the height. So we can configure it what sort of height we want it off the ground. There's some other interfacing ones where we need to update the state of the component. So for example, maybe we only want the markers to show up when the entity is selected. So that's one of the things. And then we also need to tell it when are we previewing, where's the location that we're previewing to. So a selection marker is easy. It's going to be the location of whatever entity the component's attached to. But the preview and the destination ones are going to need a location updated. So the first thing we'll do is the set selected. We'll just pass that as a UIN8. The other one was the preview. So the way we're going to do preview is we'll call it update preview. And we're just going to pass the position, and then we'll use that position based on what the position is to set the preview state. And then the last one is the actual location of where we're going to be setting it. And because we're going to have the 3 different types of markers, we need to have a type. So let's come back to our marker component. Just at the top here, I'm going to define an enum for that. Enum. And that will be, so would we say, well, we're going to have no marker. Oops. No marker is the default. And then we've got our selection, destination, preview. So if you've got any other markers you want to do, you can add them in here. And then we'll take that back to our interface. And we're going to, for the location, and then for the location, we can copy const actually. And we include the forward. So that's the forward declaration there. And then we'll just call that type. And then so on the entity, then we can, because we'll have the 3 separate components, we can then use this to decide what component we're going to send the update to for the location. It'll make sense later. So let's come back to our component now. So the way I'm going to create the components on the entity or whatever is using these markers is I'm going to actually iterate over this enum and create one for each value that's in this enum. So later on, if you add to this, say you want some other marker, like target or something, then you can just add target here and it's going to add a component for it straight away. Like you don't have to do anything. So to do that, we're going to need get enum's value function here, which is going to be a template. Templates here to be defined in line. So that's what we're doing here. Going to return an array. So in here, I'm going to define our array. And then we're going to iterate over the enum for Y. And this will be a static cast to int32. And it's going to be t, which will be our enum value. And we're going to put no marker. Now we'll change this to int32. So now we need to add the enum to our enum values. Static cast t. So we're casting out enum to the index. And then we're going to return the enum values. So that should give us an array of enum types. Sorry, enum values. So we'll see that in use in a sec. Now we had that type, so we need to define that stuff now. So let's make a protected section here, and we want to define the type that this component will be. So we'll have 3 of these components on our entity, and we'll set the type. And while we're down here, we're going to do some other properties. So we're going to have a location. So that'll be the location of the marker. And then we're going to have all our states. So it'll be just like bools. So I'm going to use integers here, and I'm just going to have one for visibility. So this will be whether it's visible or not. We're going to need 2 more variables of that type, and we'll have preview. So whether it's previewing or not, and whether the entity is selected. I think that's all we need there. We might just initialize those in the constructor. So what do we have? We have visibility. What else we got? What's this looking for? Oh, type. Boom. There we go. All right, so we are ready to, well, we might as well start function-wise on the, we'll do some getters and a getter and setter for the type. So let's call it set marker type. And let's do a getter for that. Not sure if we'll need to get the type, but probably be handy. RTS type R automatically type rogue. Yep, get marker type. For our, we need setters for these. Don't necessarily need getters, so we'll have set selected. This is the same as what we had on our interface, so we don't need the marker type for this, that's only on the entity, so I'm just going to copy from here to here. So that. But this is not using the interface, it's just the functions that the entity will call through the component. The interface will be to go from something else to the entity. So like the player controller to the entity. So, yep, that looks right. Build those. So in here, we want to set selected to the selected state. And then we're going to call a function to set the visibility. So we'll call it set marker. I think set visibility on its own might be taken. Yeah, that's part of like a Niagara component. So do set marker visibility because we've got a step to do before we call the actual visibility. Hopefully, visibility right. And then we'll pass in the selected state, but we're going to create a function for that as well. So let's just create this first. This can be protected. So actually, before we do that, there is a function we need to override here. Void is virtual void on register. Yep. That's like the begin play of a component. And then we'll create our set marker visibility. And then the other one that I wanted to create was can we just return bool and it would be show selected. So this is going to determine, it's so we can have a setting to, so we can either show the markers all the time or we can show them only when a unit is selected. So we're going to have an option to enable, disable that, and that's what this function is going to check. Can be const, this one. Let's build all those three. Why did that do inline? Must have an error or something. Don't know. So this show selected, that's what we're going to pass to the set marker visibility. I didn't put the param in there. So, yeah. This will be in our set marker visibility here, we want to set our visibility variable. So we can disable preview. We're going to actually check, is this a preview type of marker, of component, sorry, and if preview is, if it is preview, then we want to set visibility only if preview is true. Otherwise, we'll use whatever visibility we're passing in. That makes sense. So we're just going to go type, preview, and if it's a preview, we want to check that preview variable, and otherwise we're using what we're passed in. It's just like an override for the preview. And then we can set our visibility. This is the actual set visibility on the component to our new visibility. For the selection one too, perhaps, but for the preview and the destination ones, we need to constantly update the position. So I've tried doing this in tick and I had some problems. So I'm just going to set up a timer here. You probably can use tick, but I had some problems with the VFX stuff. Yeah, what the error was now. It wasn't a unique pool or something like that. I'm not sure what was going on there, so I'm just using a timer. We can sort of adjust the rate at which it's updating to, maybe get a bit more performant if you've got a lot of units or something. But yeah, obviously it's going to affect how smooth it updates. But yeah, based on the visibility now, we want to either start that timer and activate the effect, or we want to stop the timer and deactivate the effect. So we're just going to go start update timer and activate, which is a function on the component. That's true is not saying activated, saying reset it. That's what we're going to do. And then otherwise, if it's not visible, we want to stop the update timer. These are functions we're going to create, by the way. Didn't realize that. And then deactivate. So let's just create these functions before we forget. And we're going to need a timer handle to manage that. So I'm going to create a property for that. It's F timer handle. We'll just call it. I usually like to prefix it with timer handle. Timer handle, whatever it is. Update. I'll do. Let's copy that. So in here, only start the timer if it's not already operating. So let's check that it is. So get world, get timer manager, paste in our handle. And so yeah, if that's not active, then we want to do this again. And we want to set the timer. And paste in our handle again. We're going to set it on this class, and we're going to run a function. Function on this class. We'll just call this update. And we're going to do it every 0.1 seconds. It'll be nice and smooth at the moment. Play with that if you want. And it's got a loop, because it will just loop until we turn it off. Oh, this is automatically picked up the function update. Is what I wanted, which is another function we're going to create. What's it getting online? There we go, and we're gonna, that'll run every tick, or every tick of that timer anyway. And then to stop the timer, get our timer manager again. Not stop, it's clear timer. And we pass our timer handle. So we sort of just made our own tick, essentially, that we can adjust the speed of. Alright, before we go on to update, let's do this one. We need to do our developer settings to do this one. So we do have the class, it just doesn't got anything on it yet. So let's grab the developer settings. That's that one. And that's added the include at the top. Let's call it settings, and then we just do get default. No, just default. That one. That's our settings now. We can read. It has to be const, because it's not changeable. And what we want to do is in our settings, we'll have a setting for display only on selected. There will be some Boolean type setting. And if that is true, then we can return if this entity is selected. Otherwise, it's always going to be true, right? So like if we're not displaying early unselected, then we're displaying it all the time. So we want it to be all the time. However, if we're only displaying selected, we want to return true or false, depending on whether it's selected or not. So let's add this to our developer settings. It's going to need to be blueprint. Pretty sure you need the blueprint accesses for this. I'm not 100% on that, but can't hurt. Usually when you need to edit something in the editor, you need this stuff, right? Category. We'll have a few settings in here, so I might just do a settings. Settings, that'll do. And it's just going to be unit 8 again. And we're going to default this to true. Right, so back to our component now. So that's all good. And we have these functions here. We're still going to do the update and the update location. The preview, we are passing in the preview position as the preview state here. So let's update the location here to the preview position that's coming in, and then we'll set the preview state based on the position, so whether the preview state is nearly 0. So if we pass in a 0 vector, it's going to disable the preview. That's what that's doing there. So it's saying if it's not nearly 0, then preview is true. Otherwise it's false. We just do the same as this. However, we're checking the preview here, so we don't need to pass it. So that, yeah, that should be fine like that. So if the preview is false and this passes through, then it's going to set it to preview, override it. We probably could just pass preview in here, I just realized, and take that out, but that'll do. It's fine. So the location, this is more for our destination location. So we're like, yeah, this just a way to update the location only. And then for this one, we will do this, but we'll also adjust it. If we pass an invalid position, we're just going to override it to false. That'll be not. So the location isn't nearly 0 to be true, and whatever the selected result is. Alright, so now the onRegister is going to fire once we call onRegister on the component when we create it. And this is where we can do our specific setups for what type of marker this is going to be. So we're going to go straight into switching on our type. We can take out the no marker type and add our default case. Now these aren't required, so if if you've got nothing to change here, this is, for my example here, I'm going to set preview to the dotted line. I'm going to set destination to the strobing, just to show you how to talk to the material. But what we want to do here also is so we set up those functions for, on the interface, we set up the getters for the Niagara system and the getter for the material for each marker type, and that's what we need to set in here as well. So if we are using separate materials or effects, we set them all here and it will initialize itself. So what we're going to do is I'm going to assume that those sort of things, so you're going to want effects and materials based on what the entity is. So you might have multiple entities that have different selection markers or different destination markers or things like that. So I'm going to assume that that's on a data thing that the entity has access to. So that's what we're going to use the interface for now, from our component back to the entity to say, hey, for a selection component, what VFX do you want us to use? So you don't have to pass it through when you create the component. The component's actually going to come back to the entity and say, hey, where's my data? Give it to me, and it will set itself up. So we are going to go to our interface, and that's why I put these in earlier. And we're going to need all these functions. We need create markers. I think that's on the entity only. We don't need to use the interface for these, but we just want functions on the component for these, where we can then call the interface to the what's it called? The entity. This video is getting on a bit now, so we'll finish the implementation of these functions in episode 4.